Donovan McNabb, and Week 5 was one that was successful for the backup quarterback. Hey, how are you? Jason Horowitz with you on the Chase Fantasy Football Series, exclusively here on CBS SportsLine. It's Who's Hot and Who's Not. CBS SportsLine senior fantasy writer Dave Richard. He'll join me in just a sec to talk about the best and worst from Week 5 and how it will translate to Week 6. But before we get to Dave, let's talk about the job Damon Huard has done in Kansas City. Since the bye in Week 3, the Chiefs have won 2 straight, and you could attribute a great deal of it to Huard. Of all the quarterbacks over the last 2 weeks, the Chiefs' backup and for the injured Trent Green has the second best completion percentage at 72, only behind David Carr, whose team had a bye in Week 5. Huard, 4 touchdowns, 0 interceptions in that span, the best QB rating of any quarterback in the last 2 weeks, and KC now 2-2 instead of 0-2. And now we welcome in senior fantasy football writer Dave Richard via satellite from Miami. And Dave, you know, Damon Huard, he hasn't really had the best defenses against him in Arizona and San Francisco. Now he goes to Pittsburgh. His fantasy value really drops this week, right?
Right, but you're talking about him like he's an undrafted rookie who didn't know the playbook. Damon Huard's been around the league for years. He was a starter in Miami for a couple of games. He's been a backup in Kansas City for a few years. And now here he is doing the job Trent Green would be doing. Of course, I'm not sure I would start Trent Green against the Steelers, an angry Steelers team at home in Week 6, but Huard's done a good job. I got to tell you, Jason, I've started him on a couple of my fantasy teams and won.
Yeah, well, Damon Huard, you know, they're going up against the 1-3 Steelers, but before the season, he hadn't completed a pass since 2000, but he has played well. All right, on that note, let's get into the hot quarterbacks. And this week from Week 5, it's Mark Bulger, Alex Smith, and Donovan McNabb, who 354 yards against the Cowboys really got the best of Dallas. Other side of that, it's Ben Roethlisberger, Drew Bledsoe, and Brad Johnson as our cold quarterbacks. And Dave, let's talk about Ben Roethlisberger because his fantasy value, he is the only starter who has yet to throw a touchdown pass this season.
Yeah, and you know what? He was so consistent early last season, and everybody thought, well, he led the Steelers to a Super Bowl. He's going to be this great quarterback that's going to help fantasy teams. You know what? It's been the absolute reverse. Some people don't know, well, is it the motorcycle accident? Is it his emergency procedure that kept him out of Week 1? I think it's a little bit of both. I think the Steelers kind of rushed him back a little too soon. Maybe a little pressure on Ben Roethlisberger's shoulders after winning the Super Bowl. Give him a little time. You know, you also have to remember, no Antoine Randall in Pittsburgh, right, and he was a big security blanket. If you go back and look at the numbers, he was there for a couple big catches for the Steelers last year.
Yeah, and on the other note there, one of the other guys who was cold, Brad Johnson, he's been middle of the road this season as well. You know, he hasn't had a great season as far as what they were hoping for in Minnesota, but the Vikings are 3-2 this week on a bye. All right, let's move to running backs. And, you know, Noah Herron, he was the biggest surprise in Week 5, and depending on your scoring system, maybe the best fantasy running back in that week. But it was a fluke, so he doesn't make our hot running backs. Instead, we go with these guys, Chester Taylor, Deuce McAllister, and Maurice Jones-Drew, who is doing it on the ground and through the air. He's getting in the end zone. He had 2 touchdowns in each of the last 2 weeks. Let's go to the cold running backs, Jamal Lewis, Corey Dillon, and Kevin Barlow. And Dave, you know, with Corey Dillon, we've talked about it before, you just don't know if he's going to get the carries. And with Kevin Barlow, he's going to be replaced as a starter for Leon Washington.
Well, you don't know about that either, Jason. We know that Corey Dillon is going to get some carries each week. You figure around 15, and yeah, he only had 10 last week, but he's still a good number 3 fantasy running back. As far as Kevin Barlow goes, you know, if it wasn't for his touchdowns, he'd have nothing this year. No one would want him in fantasy football. So Barlow's just a guy you pretty much have to either cut bait with or just put on your bench, especially if you've got Leon Washington to start.
Well, clearly the 49ers knew nobody would want him either. They didn't want him on their team, period, let alone fantasy. All right, let's get to the hot receivers, Dave. And, you know, it's been different this year. We've got young guys playing well and big names not playing well. Our hot receivers from Week 5, Lee Evans, Bernard Varian, who had another huge game. He's averaging over 21 yards a catch, and Greg Jennings, another over 100-yard day. Cold receivers, big names, not doing anything all season. Hines Ward, a product of Ben Roethlisberger's inability to move the offense. Derek Mason, product of Denver's defense. And Terrell Owens, well, I don't know what to tell you about Terrell Owens. What do you say about Terrell Owens right now?
Well, I'll tell you what I say about all these guys. It pushes right towards the trend of having shorter, quicker NFL receivers. Lee Evans fits that mold. Bernard Varian's only 6 feet tall, but man, can he blaze. And Greg Jennings also, not exactly a tall receiver, but a guy who can catch the ball and make a play, something that the other 3 receivers you mentioned, they can't do it. Hines Ward's a little slow. Derek Mason is a possession receiver, and T.O. is like a glorified possession receiver with an ego. So This points right towards the trend that if your receiver's small and quick and has good hands and can get open, you'll want him on your fantasy team.
All right, Dave, great stuff out of you. And folks, for all the fantasy advice you can handle, be sure to read Dave Richard and Jamie Eisenberg. Dave, we'll talk to you real soon.
You got it.
All right, folks, that'll do it for Who's Hot, Who's Not exclusively here on CBS SportsLine. But for roster trends, that comes your way Wednesday. Stardom Sit-em on the way Thursday, October 12th. For all your fantasy advice, be sure to read Dave and Jamie exclusively here on CBS SportsLine. I'm Jason Horowitz. Until next time, take care.